Over to Laura from the Bureau of Meteorology, who will update you on the weather conditions at the moment, and then hand over to Deputy Commissioner Gollschewski to talk about Queensland Police operations and disaster management over the last period of time. So it's been a very busy start to our severe weather season here in Queensland. A very busy time for our fire and emergency services crews. Many parts of the state have experienced significant rainfall over the last few days, and that's resulted in many of our river catchments being saturated, and we've seen significant flooding activity overnight, particularly around Goondiwindi and Inglewood. So last night our personnel were on the ground supporting the local disaster management group and Queensland Police with the evacuation of more than 800 residents when the McIntyre Brook catchment breached its banks. That catchment received 90 millimetres of rain in around an hour, which saw a significant rise in water in that area, requiring the evacuation of people to safety. Emergency alerts were issued for Leyburn and Inglewood, and in the past 24 hours the State Emergency Service has received over 320 requests for assistance right across Western, Central and Southeastern Queensland. And our volunteers have been door knocking on properties in low-lying areas around Warwick and Leyburn. So nearly half of those State Emergency Service jobs were in the Brisbane area, and we've also had a lot of activity across southwest Queensland. Once again though, we've been called to incidents overnight requiring people to be rescued from floodwaters, people driving into floodwaters, and I can't emphasise enough the dangers of driving into floodwater. We've been getting this message out there for a long time now and people still aren't taking heed. If it's flooded, forget it. The water might look calm, it might look shallow and you might have a powerful vehicle, but the reality is it's dangerous to drive through floodwaters. So if it's flooded, forget it. Back it up, find an alternative route, take your time and think about planning your journey and how you're going to get to where you need to go. Our specialist swiftwater rescue firefighters have had to risk their lives in the last 24 hours to rescue people who have been washed away in their vehicles. A modern motor vehicle can float in as little as 15 centimetres of water in swift-moving water. So you might think that your vehicle can get through, but you can't. It's too dangerous. So please heed the message, back it up and find an alternative route. So we've seen a significant number of swiftwater rescues over the month of November and a significant number last night. And so we just urge motorists to take your time. If you don't need to be on the roads at the moment, please stay home. The roads are wet and slippery and conditions are dangerous, and there are many river catchments that are going to come up quickly. We're seeing flash flooding in some locations due to some of this rainfall. And so please drive to the conditions out on the road. We want everyone to get home safe and we want our fire and emergency services personnel to be safe while they're out on the roads as well. I'm going to hand over to Laura now, who will update you on the weather conditions.
Thanks, Commissioner. So we've seen some significant rainfall overnight across large parts of Queensland. The focus is really in the southeast, however, where we did see quite intense rainfall. So over 50 of our gauges saw over 100 millimetres in the past 24 hours in the southeast of Queensland alone. So for today, the good news is that the upper trough, this big weather system that's been causing all of this widespread rainfall has now moved offshore. So we can see a little bit of reprieve in terms of this very widespread rainfall that has caused so much impact across Queensland. However, it's really important to note that we are expecting to see showers and storms today. So the activity has gone from this very widespread rainfall and moved across to be more isolated. So what we might call hit and miss. So some areas will still see rainfall, heavy rainfall under these storms, and some areas may not. So we're definitely not out of the woods yet, even though this weather system has moved offshore. So another key message from the Bureau today is that our catchments are saturated. They're responding incredibly quickly to any rainfall. So we actually don't need to see these heavy or intense amounts to see impacts on the ground from flash flooding or riverine flooding. We have multiple warnings out for the floods, and we're also issuing severe weather warnings or thunderstorm warnings when we're likely to see heavy or intense rainfall that could lead to flash flooding. So finally, from the Bureau, we're really encouraging people today to know your weather, know your risk, and get onto the website, get onto the app, have a look at what's happening in your location, because the activity today will be a lot more isolated, but definitely not over. So please be prepared for the weather that is coming. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. If I could just start with our operations overnight that Commissioner Leach referred to. So at Inglewood, of course, we saw an evacuation of the town because of the impacts of flooding that were expected there. There's a real clear message in this, for those areas and for anywhere across the state. And we've been pushing this message for some time now. It's about getting ready and being ready for these sort of things. So even though we get fantastic support out of BOM and out of our local hydrologists, and through our disaster management arrangements, we don't know what's going to happen until quite late sometimes. So what we saw out there was a significant amount of rain in a short period of time, which meant a sudden rise in the river out there, leading to the evacuation call. So we haven't made any disaster declarations, but we have made localised emergency declarations under Public Service Preservation Act by our police, and that has worked very effectively. So first and foremost, the community of Inglewood is safe. I spoke to Mayor Springborg this morning on the ground. We are making sure the state is engaging with the council to make sure they've got everything they need to get through this. The waters are going down, and we should know as the day goes on whether there's been any damage of any concern, and also be able to repatriate people back in that town. But it's not over. Today we'll be putting out an emergency alert to evacuate the town of Yalarbin, so 200 persons. So those impacts are still continuing to happen for us. That will unfold as the day goes on. We are ahead of the game with that, so we have confidence that we'll be able to execute that quite well. But this isn't over, so some of this water will continue to cause problems. We're looking at what it might mean in St George and other areas, particularly in the Dalby District Disaster Management area, to see what's going to happen later this week. In some instances there, and also Gundawindi, we are not expecting the peaks until later this week, possibly Friday. At this stage, Gundawindi, we believe on the modelling, will be below the levy levels. But we'll continue to watch that. Can I also draw attention to people that there are multiple road closures in the areas out there, particularly main roads that they need to be aware of. So, for example, in the Warrego Highway at Miles, Cunningham Highway, a number of places, including Inglewood, Leichhardt Highway, Gore Highway, Dawson Highway, and on the list goes. So please, before you are travelling, if you absolutely have to travel, do so safely, but get onto 131940, the DTMR number, to work out whether the road closure is going to impact on you. I'm going to finish off by just saying exactly what Commissioner Leach said around the need for people to really assess the risk about being out on the roads. We're already doing some swiftwater rescues. There's one at the moment in Oakey area that's unfolding, where several vehicles have been impacted. These things continue to happen. They won't happen if you're not out and about. So please be very careful about that. And for everyone at home, be ready. Just be prepared. We are at the beginning of our wet season. Can I just remind people that? We are on the 1st, I think it's the 1st, yes, 1st of December. We have several months to go through this, and we're not even in cyclone stage season yet. So we really need everyone to be listening to the message. Thank you.
Steve, I'm not sure if this is for you or for Greg, but can you give us a sense of what happened at Inglewood? Do we have any idea of the extent of damage? Where were people evacuated to? How did that happen? Give us an idea of what...
Yeah. So how it unfolded, as I said, it happened quite quickly. The briefs earlier in the evening were that we expected only around 10 residences to be impacted. So the local disaster management group was meeting. So the chair, which is the mayor, was out there. We had police, emergency services on the ground, and all involved in that. As the night went on, the water was significantly more than had been expected, so the modelling changed. So it was modelled up, and we went from initially, I think, and I might leave that to BOM if they have the details, but we're looking at around just over 10 metres, but that got revised up to over 11 metres. So once we're heading over 11 metres, we're in a major flood issue, and the town being isolated and residences being impacted on. So I believe that it hit about 11.3. I don't have the exact figure, and it's now on the way down about 10.85. We'll make sure that that's the only peak. You know, are we expecting any further peaks? So the modelling's still happening around that. So as I said, what can happen is you have a lot of rain really quickly, and we really don't know until the rain falls and we see it going into the systems about how it can be modelled to see what levels we're going to get to. Now the good news is that a very quick and good call was made on the ground by the local disaster management group to evacuate the town. So emergency alerts were activated, doors were knocked on, everyone's safe. Okay?
Just on your Larbin, that's being evacuated now?
That's today, yeah, it's happening this morning.
What's the situation there exactly?
So it's that similar issue, so with water rising in that area, so same catchment area. So what you see is water moves through these catchments and we get peaks as they go along.
Where are they being evacuated?
I don't have those details, and that's unfolding at the moment.
Well, you heard with Inglewood that they might have been evacuated to the cemetery?
That's, yeah, the reason for that is that's the high ground. So all local management groups have plans that they enact, that includes their evacuation plans. So what happened there was people that couldn't get out or people that needed to evacuate, that was a place of refuge it could go to. In the end, I think we ended up with probably more cars there than people because people wanted to move their cars out of the water. But the local group also pushed facilities in there to make sure that people were supported. But as you heard from the Mayor, pretty uncomfortable night for people, but they're all safe.
And do we know what sort of damage there might have been out there?
No, not yet. That's a bit too early for us. So there will be assessments made of those areas, and Commissioner Leach might want to comment on that.
Thank you. So we're keeping an eye on the flood situation in Inglewood today, and as that water starts to recede, we'll have fire and rescue personnel and state emergency service personnel in there to undertake damage assessment. We'll do some rapid damage assessment, understand what the level of damage is. We do know there's been some above floor flooding in some buildings, and once we understand what the extent of damage is, we'll get resources in to assist residents with cleaning up their properties and washing them out so that they can start the recovery process.
And talk to me about what's going to happen as it moves downstream. Steve mentioned those places, St George, Windy, that they're looking at. How is that going to unfold? Do
Yes.
you know?
So there's a number of river catchments that they're watching very closely at the moment, and as the water does move down these various catchments, we'll work with the local disaster management groups and local communities to get those preparedness messages out so that people can do what they need to do to protect their property or to make the decision to evacuate early. The local disaster management group has all the relevant representatives from emergency services and local government, and they can get those messages out to their community.
Are there any examples you can give us of the sort of rescues that your personnel have had to carry out over the last 24, 48 hours?
Sure. So we've undertaken a range of rescues. In the majority of those rescues, people have driven into floodwaters. Their vehicles have either stalled or been washed off the roadway, and people have been able to self-evacuate. That still requires the attendance of emergency service personnel to get to those vehicles and assess them to make sure that there is no one still trapped in the vehicles. And in a couple of cases, we've had to respond and actually rescue people from the floodwaters. People take refuge on their vehicles or cling to a tree. That puts our personnel in danger in having to go in and rescue them. And I think with all the messaging we've done about if it's flooded, forget it, I think it's inexcusable that people continue to drive into floodwaters, putting not only themselves but first responders' lives at risk.
And what sort of places are you talking about? Because we've seen vision of people doing it around here, around,
Yes.
not Inglewood or anywhere like that, around these sort of places,
yes.
Logan.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're seeing these sorts of events all over southeast and southwest Queensland at the moment, not only in the Gundawindi area, but around the Logan River area, Bow Desert, Cecil Plains, a whole range of areas overnight where we've seen people making the decision to drive through floodwaters when we clearly want them to get the message that's too dangerous. Back it up and find another route.
With the southeast corner around Brisbane, Ipswich, Bow Desert, Logan, etc., Logan River, is there any risk of property inundation in those areas?
There is. So we're working closely with the Bureau of Meteorology and their hydrologists to understand what the flood levels will look like. Steve made mention before of some of the flood level heights, and we're tracking that against historical flood records, so we do have some good understanding of what the river levels mean for certain levels of inundation, and we'll try and get that messaging to local communities early so that people can make the decision to move out, evacuate early, or at least protect their property and try and get some of their assets to higher ground.
I don't know if you have that information to hand, but are there any particular properties that we should be warning people about
Well, the area that Steve was talking about now, so as the water moves down catchments, people need to understand where they live and the flood catchment that they live in, and take note of the conditions. Get onto the Bureau's website if you can, check those conditions and understand not only what water there is in your area, but what water is coming your way.
So there's no immediate concern at the moment that there's going to be sort of widespread flooding, the Logan area or Bow Desert or anything right at this stage?
Now we're seeing an easing of rainfall conditions at the moment, and so many of the river systems were due to peak early this morning or over the course of today and then start to recede. Then hopefully we'll get a reprieve for the next couple of days, but there is another weather system that comes through next week, and now that our catchments are saturated, whatever rain we get from here on, those river levels are going to rise again very quickly. So this is only the start of our severe weather system. We've got a long way to go yet. We've got saturated catchments, and so we're probably going to face this situation for the next few months potentially.
Laura, if I could just ask you, what is the outlook for, let's say, the next 2 weeks, given that the catchments are already pretty full around this area? What are we looking at?
So for the outlook, like I said, the next 5 days we are looking at that shower and storm activity. So it's a lot more isolated, it's a lot less widespread than what we have seen. Early indications into next week have let us know that we could see rainfall that is a little bit more widespread. So typically this time of year we see weather systems pushing through. So we've just had one that's come offshore, and now that we're seeing that shower and storm activity. And then next week we could see another system push through. So we're really just keeping an eye on that longer term weather pattern as these systems, they move from the west to the east as they push through how much rain they're going to drop. However, we are still in late spring, early summer, so that's really that storm season. And we can also see high amounts of rainfall from the showers and storms that fall as well. It just depends how widespread that is. So I guess the longer term outlook, we're still in a La Nina. So this is really typical of what we would see in Queensland in La Nina. It's a very early start to the season. It's a very heavy start to the season, especially end of spring, early summer. That's when we see La Nina really affect Queensland. So the next few weeks are looking to be, as weather systems push through, they could drop this rain, and yeah, like we've been saying, the catchments are saturated, so they will respond quickly, not to large amounts of rain, but even to small amounts of rainfall.
I don't know if you have this information to hand, but we were expecting about 10 localities to have broken records for November.
Yep.
Do you have that information?
I have some.
Yep.
Yeah, so as of yesterday, across Queensland, there were 18 locations that were the wettest November on record, and all those locations have more than 30 years worth of data, with the top 4 having more than 100 years worth of data. So some significant records being broken there. That will get updated today. So yesterday it was sitting at 18, and there may have been a few more that have got that record overnight, so we can update that information as the day wears on.
You know, those 4 that you were saying that have broken 100, more than 100 year records, what are they?
I'm so sorry, I don't have them specifically. Yeah.
Just for the regions, do you have any update on Bundaberg and what they've sort of seen in terms of rainfall?
I don't have specific numbers. Yeah, sorry.
Steve, throughout the day, is it likely that we're going to see any further areas downstream of Inglewood being evacuated, apart from what you've
No, Yalaba, it is at this stage. Just remember what we do is the modelling is good, particularly once the rain has fallen and we start to see it ease, the hydrology can be much more precise in terms of the impacts. As you heard, there's a lot of historical data around some of these catchments, and we know how they're going to behave and we know how much water has fallen. What we will do is exactly what we've done in Inglewood and what we were doing in Yalaba, is put out emergency alerts. So if people in those communities, stay connected. You know, if you get the message on your phone, take notice of what it says, and also through the broadcasters that broadcast the emergency information. So please stay connected out there. And then we follow that up as we did in Inglewood last night with door knocks of those places that are most at risk. So we've got a really tried and true methodology to do that, but we also need the community to stay engaged so that works really effectively. But we'll update as it goes. As I said, with some of the other places, you have got, as Commissioner, there's different catchments here that are in play. It will take several days before we see those peaks, so that'll be refined as we get closer.
a dumb question, but are there any water releases happening in those areas that will affect people?
I understand the dam at I'll get the name of it in a minute, Coolmunda or something it is, the one near Inglewood, was full and was overflowing and they'd opened gates. But they have emergency action plans for all of those dams and they operate within those, and that's all factored into our planning. So how we operate those dams is put into the local disaster management group, and that they take that into consideration when they're making their planning around what to do in the local area.
So that was a dam near Inglewood?
That's, yes, and probably check the name of it. It's an unusual name I haven't
Right,
heard
okay,
before.
but that didn't have any additional impact on what we've seen?
No, these are all part of the water catchments, of course. These are all part of the water flows. So you take that into consideration when you're looking at how much water is flowing. But with any dam, of course, once they reach capacity, the water has to go somewhere.
South Laura, Ivanhoe seems somewhat cursed for many of these events for missing rain. Has it managed to get anything this time around?
I'm not sure I'm so sorry, I don't have a lot of specific information. I can answer your Bundaberg question now though, if you want me to go back. Yeah, so a lot of the activity last night fell to the south of Bundaberg, so that whole region along the coast saw sort of under 10 millimetres, so it really did miss out. Further inland, we did start to see the falls creep up 25 to 60 around the place, but yeah, just along that coastal area, under 10. Yeah, it's very patchy.
Thank you. Thanks, Thank you.
If you want overlay, we can give them to our questions.
That'd be great, thank you.